Hello, thank you for stopping by. I am so glad you're here. In this video, I'm going to be making a very easy recipe for pate en croûte, which normally sounds really intimidating, but I found a very simplified version of it from Julia Child. This is season 7, episode 13 of The French Chef, and it is called Meatloaf Madness. I will be following along with the episode. I will also be using recipes from this book, The French Chef Cookbook. Now, this book does have recipes that correlate to episodes of The French Chef, but it stops partway through season 6. So this episode in season 7 doesn't have a specific section in here dedicated to it, but I was able to find the same pate recipe in here on the 21st show, Pates. Wasn't able to find the same pastry dough recipe anywhere, so I just scaled that down from what she gives us in the episode. Let's get started watching and see what Julia has to tell us.
This beautiful object is a pate en croûte. It's one of the glories of French civilization.
Calling it one of the glories of French civilization is very Julia Child.
We're doing meatloaf masquerade today on The French Chef.
She's saying this is ground meat and fancy dress and calling the episode Meatloaf Masquerade. Calling French pate en croûte meatloaf is a bit cheeky, but this is something I really like about Julia Child, and I think that we sometimes forget. She was intending for these recipes to be more accessible to the average American home cook, and she was calling this meatloaf to make it less intimidating.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to The French Chef. I'm Julia Child.
She's starting off by giving us a basic pate mixture and telling us there are ways we can dress it up and make it our own as we go. I decided to keep this simple and only use ingredients I could find at my local grocery store, which is a Jewel, which is owned by Kroger. So it is a pretty standard American grocery store.
Start out with 2 3/4 cup of lean ground veal.
Okay, she gives us a recipe big enough to feed an army, so I had to adjust that a little bit. I found her recipe for this very similar pate from the 21st episode, and it calls for 3/4 pound of lean ground pork, 3/4 pound of lean ground veal. For the pork fat, I am using a premium quality lard. I had to look up the difference between regular lard and premium quality. This comes from a little bit choicer areas of fat on the pig, apparently, and it's supposed to have a finer texture and a more delicate flavor. And I'm using 1/2 pound of this for the recipe. I'm going to start mixing this all together here.
And you're going to beat this up nicely.
So we got ground pork, ground veal, 2 lightly beaten eggs. Into this, I'm adding 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Calls for 1/8 teaspoon of pepper, 1/2 teaspoon of thyme, and then a big pinch of allspice. I don't have allspice. I'm substituting Chinese 5-spice. And 1 clove of minced garlic. I forgot to put the fat in. Whoops. She also calls for ground bay leaf here. So I just took bay leaf and ground it in this little pestle. I actually added a little bit of salt in here with it because it wasn't grinding very well. But when you add the salt, the extra grittiness helps the leaf grind up. But if you've ever wondered what flavor a bay leaf adds, try grinding one up like this. Like, mix it with a little bit of salt and grind it up and smell it, and you can really see it really brings out what flavor it is. So the recipe in the book just calls for 1/2 cup of minced onions. In the episode, she calls for them to be cooked. I'm not going to cook them. I'm just going to put the minced onions in following the recipe from the book.
And you're going to beat this up nicely. And you can do this either by hand, but if you happen to have a heavy-duty electric mixer, it's a lot easier.
I'm going to use my electric beater.
But you want to beat it up until the whole mixture is lovely and light and fluffy.
Whipping meat with the mixer is weird. I would say that this is lovely, light, and fluffy now. Definitely would recommend the electric mixer with it rather than by hand. So this is a really good idea. She says after you've beat it up, just take a little bit of it and saute it in a pan and then taste it just so you can make sure that it's properly seasoned at this point.
Because it's raw pork.
Unfortunately, my audio cut out, but it didn't go for too long before I noticed. So I tasted the mixture. I thought it was a bit bland. I added a lot more salt. I added pepper. I added more thyme. I added sage just to beef up the flavoring a little bit. Then into this, I also added a 1/4 cup of brandy. The recipe calls for cognac. Cognac was $65 a bottle. Brandy was $15 a bottle. I went the cheapskate route and decided to do the $15 a bottle.
Strips of veal, cut about like that, or else you can use dices of veal. And if you would like, you can use a truffle.
So now she talks about additional things you can start adding into it. I didn't do any extras like that, partly because I'm trying to be a cheapskate. I'm also focusing on things that I can get at my local grocery store. And while they did have ground veal, they did not have veal cutlets that I could dice up.
Then you have the next thing which you're going to make, which is the dough for the pate, or the croute.
In the French Chef cookbook, I was not able to find an exact match to this recipe, so I'm going by the recipe she gives verbally, and I had to scale it down because she is giving a recipe big enough to feed an army.
For this, we want to have
And she's kind of confusing about that anyways.
That's a pound of lard, that would be an eighth. I can't figure that out, but anyway.
She can't figure it out. Very helpful. Very helpful. So I am unfortunately not eating butter right now. So anytime the recipe calls for butter, I'm just substituting lard. And this is still the premium quality lard. So here is the recipe I sort of fudged from the numbers she gave us. I'm starting with 2.5 cups of flour. And I'm putting this into my mixer. And I've got 10 tablespoons of lard cut into small pieces.
And then you want 1 2/3 tablespoons of salt.
Then I have 1 whole egg. She calls for just the egg yolk, but just sort of fudging the numbers a little bit, I decided to use a whole egg. Then I'm putting enough ice water in to bring it up to 2/3 a cup. And then I'm whisking this all together.
There's a pastry blender. And do it this way. Or do it in an electric mixer. We've done that several times.
Okay, I just pulsed my stand mixer a few times with the flour and the lard in there just to break it all up a little bit more and get it more of an even crumb. 1/2 teaspoon of salt into that. Okay, I'm going to just pulse this a few more times until the pieces of lard break down a little bit more.
You want to break it up until it looks like fine meal.
So this is the 1 egg and enough cold water to bring it up to 2/3 cups. I'm just going to mix this in.
Mix it into the pate, mix it into your dough, then stir it around with a rubber spatula, then put it out onto a pastry board or marble.
And I'm going to transfer it to a hand mixing bowl to finish this out. I just like doing this in a bowl instead of on the board itself.
And make it into a rough ball.
It's come together enough I can just knead it to a smooth consistency. Barely working it because you don't want it to get hot.
And then it must rest in the refrigerator.
Then into a bag, into the refrigerator to rest.
For at least 2 hours.
For at least 2 hours. Okay, wow.
This dough is called a pate.
Yeah, Googling a pate in English produces 0 results. Because it's pate. I know there's like the accent mark on pate versus pat. Okay, the dough has rested for a couple hours. It's still in the refrigerator. I'll take it out here in just a second. I brought the pate mixture out already, and I'm continuing on with the video. And Julia Child is going to France, apparently. She's taking a little trip to France. Got a free vacation on the show's dime. So let's see what happens. Oh, wow. Okay, she comes driving like a mad woman and almost takes out a couple of pedestrians. Nice. Bonjour. This is one of the most aggressively French things I've ever seen. So she's showing an actual French charcuterie maker making a similar pate en croûte.
Alors donc, de la pâte brisée.
That's a pie crust dough.
He used a pâte brisée, which is just like a standard pie crust dough, rather than the pastry dough that she showed us earlier. All right, he's just wrapping it up, putting an egg wash on it, wrapping it up, and pricking it with a fork.
And then just turn it over like that.
Ça consiste, on le pique comme ça pour pas
Then really cool like vine and leaf cut designs on here.
faire une sorte.
Ça c'est la branche. Wasn't he nice?
Okay, she skips forward to where she already has the thing encased, and she's focusing on the decoration. So I guess it's time to roll out the pastry dough and fill it.
You know, his wife had just had a baby that morning.
This dough's getting a little bit big for my board here, so I'm just going to cut part of it off. And this is what I will save for the vine and the leaves.
This is the same pate, of course, not as big.
Going to just pile this in the middle. I've got a lot more pate filling than I do dough. Following what he does in this video, I'm just going to start brushing this down with an egg wash here. I very unfortunately ran out of eggs, So this is just melted lard that I'm using. Flip this one over. So just cut the ends off and prick it with a fork, apparently. Okay, then he just dusts it with a bunch of flour and flips it onto a baking sheet.
Que je vous aide?
À mettre le pâté en croûte
Oui.
dessus. Je vais le mettre là.
Then pricking it with a fork again.
Pour laisser échapper la vapeur.
I'm going to make the decorations now. I'm going to keep this in the refrigerator while I do that, just to make sure the dough stays chilled. I need a big vine and then some leaves. Okay, so I got like a vine, a couple of leafy things. Mine aren't looking quite as big as hers, but whatever. Okay, I think I have enough leaves. Now it's time to decorate. This is super hard. Like, you got to work really quickly and gently with it. All right, I got the leaves on. Going to use a knife to draw little leaf sort of patterns in it. I don't know how well this is even going to survive the baking process. Yeah, this is definitely looking like a beginner project here. All right, I'm really regretting being out of egg and not having the egg glaze for this. I should have prepared better. Whoops.
Funnels that go on the end of a pastry bag.
Now it's time to put in a couple of little vents. She has you using pastry tubes for that. Can I do it without messing it up? Make a little hole, like make sure this funnel doesn't get gooped up with pastry. Okay, and then she puts a thermometer into the top. I'm using a probe thermometer that I'm going to put in through the side.
This pate is about 20 inches long, 6 inches wide.
Okay, so now I'm putting this, I put it on this pan upside down, and I'm putting that pan into this pan. She says that a lot of fat will come off of it, and I'm hoping that if I do it this way, all the fat will drain off to the sides, and it won't just sort of be sitting in its own fat while it's cooking. That's the goal. And also this pan has sides to it so that all the fat that does drain off doesn't go into my oven. Here's what it looks like pre-cooking. She says to put it in the oven at 425 until it starts to brown nicely. Check on the middle rack. Once it starts to brown, you bring the heat down to 350 degrees and cook it for about 20 minutes.
So it browns nicely. If it seems to be bubbling quite a bit, turn the oven down to 325 or even 300.
Okay, so we're basically just cooking it at 425 until the crust starts to brown. Then you bring it down and watch it until the internal temperature reaches 165 degrees, meaning it's safe to eat.
Because it's raw pork.
2 regrets I have from this process. I cheated and I did not let the pastry set for a full 2 hours. It was like an hour and like 10 minutes more like, and I thought, oh, that'll be fine. It could have done the full 2 hour set, so it was really nice and chilled. I found it was a little bit too warm. I regret not having an egg for the final egg wash. I think that's kind of a big part of it, and I might have goofed up. And I also regret the pate filling to crust ratio. What I am going to do is put this in a bag and freeze it. And when I want to make another pate en croûte, I will have the base ready to go.
And then you're ready to bake the pate, and you want to bake it in a 425 degree oven.
All right, y'all. I cooked this sad-looking thing until 170 degrees inside, so it's fully done temperature-wise. Definitely not nice and flaky as it should be. And obviously, this poor bit just fell off the edge because the pan it's on wasn't big enough. I think the biggest problem is that I just brushed it with more lard on the top, adding more fat to it rather than the egg wash. So that extra fat just really made the top soak up grease and become soggy. So what I'm going to do, I think, is taste this now just so I know what the filling tastes like. So I'll know if I want to remake this and any changes I might be able to make to the filling at this point. I have half of it left from before, so I can use that half to remake this. I just have to go get some eggs so I can do a proper egg wash. Let's cut a piece of this sad pate en croûte. Here we have a cross section of the piece. It's definitely coming out looking more like a meatloaf than pate. It's delicious though. Wow. Very tasty. I definitely want to attempt a part 2 with this couple things I'm going to do differently. I will prick holes on it more. Part of the reason the crust is soggy in spots is I didn't have enough vents pricked. I don't know that these things even worked at all as a vent. And I'm going to egg wash it, not brush it with more lard. All right, I am back for day 2, attempt 2 at Julia Child's meatloaf. I have already made the pastry dough. This time, instead of trying to follow her weird janky recipe, I decided to just make a standard Pate brisée. On Julia's little side quest where she talks to the father of the year who left his brand newborn infant and wife to go make charcuterie for Julia Child.
You know, his wife had just had a baby that morning.
He calls the dough he's making a Pate brisée.
La pâte brisée.
And I'm able to find Pate brisée recipes very easily. And what Julia Child called a pate looked very similar to a Pate brisée. So that's what I'm making. It's almost the same thing. It's basically a regular pie dough, but with a little bit of egg yolk. This time I decided I'm going to put some green olives down the middle just for a little bit of visual interest and to switch it up a bit. I have a real egg wash here. Rewatching myself yesterday, I could see the mistakes I was making. Some people need hundreds of hours of therapy to come to realizations like the ones I had rewatching myself yesterday, but I got it for free. I just filmed myself doing stupid stuff and have a mild existential crisis, a little bit of an epiphany, come out the other side, and hopefully make this thing correctly today. Got my Pate brisée chilled. I'm going to roll it out. I'm not going like hecka thick, just a little bit thicker than I would. Down the middle with the filling. I'm just going to put the olives in a row down the middle. Okay, and then I'm just going to fold the meat up around, brush this with an egg wash. The appliques are sticking pretty well. All right, let me tell you something 1,000 times easier to work with today. A better pastry recipe that is properly chilled. It's amazing how much difference that makes. I'm going to prick holes in it, not holding back with these holes. And now for the little vent. That may be a bit dramatic. These are really big and really disruptive. You know what? I just cut holes out of the top and I'm not going to put the piping vents in there. Here we go, into the oven at 425. I'm going to cook this for about like 15 minutes or until it starts to brown. Julia said to cook this for 30 minutes and then turn the oven down and then cook it for like another 45 minutes to an hour. Like she says, it needs almost 2 hours in the oven. All right, let's hope that works out better. It was definitely easier to assemble. Sometimes if I can just get out of my own stupid way, sometimes things work better. I'll be back when it's done. Okay, here it is right out of the oven. Ended up cooking it for about an hour, just a little over an hour. And it's looking pretty decent. These 3 holes in the top are kind of unsightly. In the future, what I would do is take a knife and make little slash holes down the side to let the oil drain out the bottom. What I'm going to do is transfer this to a different pan so it's not sitting in its own grease and chill it. So this will go into the refrigerator. While this is chilling, I will transfer the aspic to the mold I'm using for it. Then when it's all done, I will serve them together. Here we are again. It is time to taste. The aspic is set. The pate en croûte is chilled completely through. I have to say, I'm actually really happy with how it came out visually, other than the giant holes I made in the top. Definitely wouldn't do that again. Maybe a few little knife crosses on the top to vent steam, but those big giant holes are just not it. My bad. So I'm going to cut myself a piece of this. Here's a cross section. Just get closer with that. I think that's pretty, that's rather attractive. You've got the olive in there. I think the olive was a nice addition. All in all, I find this to be a very attractive little slice. It's absolutely delicious. The crust came out really well. The filling is excellent. As far as it all goes, the filling isn't any more work than a normal meatloaf. It's just really tasty. It's a lot more money than a normal meatloaf, even doing the sort of stripped back version of it that I did. So for the effort of a meatloaf and a pie crust, you get this pretty fancy Julia Child's meatloaf, pate en croûte. Very, very simple, beginner-friendly training wheels pate en croûte. But it is similar to the texture of a meatloaf, but a very fine, soft meatloaf. I would say the texture is halfway between an American meatloaf and a liver pate. So it is not quite the full like smoothness of a liver pate, but it is a lot more tender and more consistent in texture than a regular standard American meatloaf. Very mild flavors, not a strong pork. It's only half pork. And then veal is a very, very subtle flavor. It got hot in the oven and the lard in it just started boiling. until all of the contents have just sort of boiled in lard for a long time. And it just made it really tender and delicious. And then when it cooled, it all set. So it gave it just more of the pate texture. The olives add a nice sharp contrast to the mild pate. The filling is not overbaked by any means. I got it up well above 200 degrees, but I decided to keep baking it until the crust looked done to me. That's the right way to do it. I would say don't worry about the internal temperature. As long as it's over 165, you're good.
Because it's raw pork.
There's so much fat in this that it's not going to dry out. You just want to focus on cooking it until the crust is done. I think for a New Year's Eve party, this would be amazing. People come in and see it. It's a conversation starter. Like, oh, what is that? Pate en croûte, Julia Child, ooh la la. It's not that much work. It's a meatloaf and a pie crust. It came out really good the second time. Make sure you use a good crust. I think the crust recipe I had originally used actually would have worked just fine if I hadn't A, brushed it with additional fat, and B, if I had just kept it in the oven until it cooked. I think that will be it for today. If you have any episodes of The French Chef that you would like me to attempt, please let me know down below in the comments. If you have liked the video, please give it a like, and if you want to see more, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the future.
That's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appetit!